Okay, I want to pick up where we left off last video, namely the two counterintuitive axioms Aristotle holds about happiness that would sound funny when you first say them today. And they are: happiness is the same for everybody. That is, happiness is objective, not subjective. It's the same for everybody to some extent. And two, happiness is your responsibility. In other words, if you're not happy, it's your fault to some extent. Okay, so let's take the latter one first. Happiness is your responsibility. That is, happiness is within your power. You have the power or choice to be happy. And if you're not happy, it might be, or it probably is, something you're doing. Now, Aristotle he wasn't aware, obviously, of something like mental health or of clinical depression or psychology. He's writing 2,500 years ago. However, he did recognize that there are certain constitutions, natural and environmental, that will push against happiness. So he wasn't that out to lunch about what we might think today about and what we might understand about how environment and neurochemistry influence happiness. However, even modern psychology, and this is sort of standard about modern psychology. What you do, for example, if someone is suffering from clinical depression or anxiety, what you do is you take antidepressants, obviously serotonin reuptake inhibitors, to help balance out the neurochemistry of the whole thing. But you don't just give people antidepressants in modern therapy. What you do is you take them through. I mean, the most effective means is cognitive behavioral therapy, which looks a lot like some of the things that Aristotle suggests to do, and we'll come back to that. But Aristotle's reasoning for saying that happiness is within your control or it's your responsibility is his picture of the human being. Remember, the human being is different from other animals. Why? Because we have choice and therefore responsibility in a different way than animals do. We have a say, and nature is silent in a certain sense and lets us sort of decide. We have reins and over our life and over our choices that in a way that no other being does or has. And so we have choice in a different manner. We have responsibility. And for Aristotle, this is the sort of upshot of the whole book, is that our choices lead to habits. Our choices lead to habits. He says at one point, our choices are like stones we throw and we can never retrieve. Every single choice we make, we're etching in our soul or in our mind or in our whatever, our heart, patterns of behavior and habits. And those habits are our character. Those habits are character. That's what character is. The word habit, ethos, and the word moral character, ethike, and this is in Book 2, Chapter 1, Aristotle notes this, they mean the same thing for Aristotle. They're not only etymologically related, but who you are is what you habitually do and what you habitually take joy in and like. Okay, so for Aristotle, if you're unhappy, you have the ability to change that to some extent. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later on. Second point, happiness is objective, not subjective. In other words, happiness is the same for everybody to some extent. Now, what he means by this is something very simple. If you take happiness to mean, for Aristotle, psychological health, he means that just as, and I've already mentioned this in the videos prior, just as physical health is generally speaking the same for everybody. In other words, no one's going to get healthy eating junk food. And no one's going to be unhealthy eating, I don't know, high protein, moderate carbohydrate, moderate fat, healthy foods like, I don't know, fruits and vegetables and salmon or whatever, right? There's healthy food and unhealthy food. By analogy, then, there is healthy choices. There are healthy choices and unhealthy choices, okay? And we admit this all the time. No one would say that the behavior and choices that someone who's a drug addict, who's addicted to drugs, that those are good choices and conducive to happiness, right? And we would say that people who try to work hard to help others, who live life responsibly, who work hard and find meaning in their life, that these people are generally speaking happier. So happiness is objective for Aristotle in the same way physical health is objective for Aristotle. Psychological health is what happiness is. Aristotle means by happiness human flourishing or psychological flourishing. And what leads to psychological flourishing is the correct choices that people can make in line with our essential nature. Now, this is what's known as the function argument for Aristotle. And I'll talk about it a little bit more in the next video. But just right off the bat, the reason Aristotle says happiness is objective is because all humans share humanity. They share an essential nature, okay? In the same way we share basically the same physiology, right? We all have, so in other words, if I take Advil, it's not going to hurt me, and generally speaking, it's going to have the same effects on me that it does on the rest of the world. Now, there's some people that are allergic to Advil or whatever, but same thing with all kinds of medicines, right? They do human trials, they test for side effects. How do they know that, why don't they just throw their hands up and say, well, everybody's different? Because everybody isn't that different. Now, there is differences, and Aristotle admits that, but generally speaking, what's consumable and healthy for me physically is also healthy for you, generally speaking. Not that there's not a relativity to this. Not a relativism, but a relativity. Not a relativism, but a relativity. In the same way with choices, there are, generally speaking, choices and behaviors and ways of existing and ways of living that are conducive to psychological health and ways that are unhealthy. And every psychologist will recognize this. Every clinical psychologist will recognize this, and every research psychologist too, that there are healthy and unhealthy behaviors. There's good, depending on what you want and what kind of ends you're looking for. And the end Aristotle's looking for is psychological health.